Good morning. Today is Monday. Today we're learning the seventh Perek of Masechus Shabbos. Today's shir is sponsored Lilei Nishmas Aaron Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Bracha Sarah B'Shmuel Leib, Bina Moshe ben Yosef, may the Neshamas will have an aliyah, and Refuah Shlema for Ada Sarah Bas Leah, Chana Pesel Bas Yenta, Yisrael ben Rachel Leah, and Rachel Bas Pesel Zelda. May they have a first shlema, first never so good, but so shach Chali Yisrael. And as a schus for Avrita Aram Megitamasha, for Shefer Bracha Vatzlacha for him and all his loved ones. Okay. Perek Zion starts off getting into the nitty gritty of all the melachas of Shabbos. The first six parchment of this Masechta, we're talking mainly about Hutzah. That's maybe what we started off over here, and now we're getting into the main 39 melachos. So it's the last one of the 39, and this now we're going to talk about all 39, the intro to them. It's important to know when it comes to Shabbos, there's an Av Malacha, and there's a Toda of Malacha. The Av Malacha is the category heading. These are the 39 actions that were taken in. Where did the 39 melachas come from? The 39 melachas came from the binyan of the Mishkan and the Midbar. There were 39 labors that were done to build the Mishkan, and those 39 melachas are the basis for Hilchos Shabbos. But those are the 39 headed categories. The Amalacha, a Toda, which is just as usher as an Amalacha, a Toda is a subcategory of the original 39. We don't add on more categories, but it's a subcategory. You can have multiple subcategories for you can have multiple Todos for an Amalacha, but there's only 39 melachas. Okay, so let's go. Klal Perek Zayin Mishnah Aleph. Klal Gadol Amr B'Shabbos. The Chachamim made a major rule when it comes to the Chai V'Chatas for Chil Shabbos. Now, it's when you do an Am Malacha, if you do it b'shogeg, accidentally, we'll talk about what that means soon. Then you bring a korachatas. If you did it intentionally if a person did it intentionally with two witnesses and the proper warning, then he was chayiv misa. He was chayiv misa's based. Then based on put him to death, would execute him. I told would have a similar consequence. Okay, so the rule was kol hashocheach iker Shabbos va'as melachos harbe b'Shabbosos harbe. So anyone who forgot the basic mitzvah to keep Shabbos, and as a result, he performed many melachos and many Shabbosos. You get this many times where someone who was born into a Jewish family but had no knowledge of Yiddishkeit and becomes a Baal Tshuva when they're in their, I don't know, 20s, 30s, whatever it is. Then for all those Shabbosim that they were not Shomer Shabbos, they didn't know any better. They were Tinek Shenishba, they didn't grow up with it. So they would only be chayiv one chatas for all the Shabbosim of their entire life that they didn't keep Shabbos. So they're only chayiv for one chatas for all the years they did not keep Shabbos. That's category A. Category B. Hayodea Eker Shabbos, us melachos harbe, Shabbos harbe. Someone who knew about Shabbos. Okay, he knows about Shabbos, he knows about the mitzvah, but he forgot that the actual day was Shabbos, and and he performed a many melachos on many Shabbos. I was thinking that the Shabbos was a weekday, but he knew what Shabbos was. Chayev al kol Shabbos. Shabbos, he is chayev achatas for each and every Shabbos that he was mechalel, that he desecrated. Okay, that's a lot more machmer than a guy who never grew up knowing anything about Shabbos. And the third category, Hayadeya Shehu Shabbos, but also melachos harbe b'Shabbos harbe, someone who knew that the day is Shabbos, but he forgot which actions are prohibited, which and as a result, he performed many melachos on many Shabbos. Well, that's kind of the worst. Chayiv al kol av malacha. He is chayiv 7 chatas for each and every category of malacha that he violated. So in the first category, the guy is only chayiv 1 chatas for all the Shabbos of his life that he didn't know about, like about Tshuva. The second category is someone who knows about Shabbos, he knows about the mitzvah, but he forgot about it. Therefore, he's chayiv 1 chatas for every Shabbos. Okay, whereas the third guy, he knows what Shabbos is, and he knows that he did many melachos. Then he is chayiv on each Shabbos for each malacha that he did, which could be up to 39 chatos. If he did 39 malachas, if he only did 6, he's chayiv 6 chatos times that by every week of the year that he's over. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. It would not be chayiv for a separate toda. You want to be chayiv for a separate malacha. It's a difference. Okay. Now, lastly, someone who performs many melachos that are similar to one malacha, meaning those are the toldas, those are the subcategories. He's only chayiv 1 chatas for all of them. That's Mishnah Aleph. Okay, Mishnah Beis. Now we're going to list, this is going to be a little bit longer Mishnah. We're going to list all the 39 melachos and go a little bit into each of them. So hang tight. It's a little bit of a long one. Mishnah Beis. Avos melachos arba'im chaser echas. So there are 30. The number of avos melachos is 40 minus 1, 39. Okay. The expression 40 minus 1 is borrowed from melachos, which actually comes later, where it's used to where it talks about melachos arba'im, but 40 lashes, but he only gets 39 lashes. That's where it borrows from. So therefore, the Mishnah wrote down arba'im chaser achas. It was easier to remember than writing just 39. Okay, so within the 39 melachos, there are different groups. There are different categories of each of the melachos. Let's go through them. The first 11 are regarding the process of making bread. Even though bread is not a melacha of the Mishkan, of the Bein HaMishkan, there were many dyes that were used in bread that were also used in making the curtains and the coverings for the Mishkan. And making bread is more common than making the curtains, so therefore those melachos regarding making the dyes was brought into the melachos of bread. Okay. Number 1, hazareya, planting. That's when you're sowing the seeds into the ground, you're planting the saplings as well, and because there's no real difference between sowing and planting, and this malacha is is any activity that causes vegetation to sprout or grow. Um, the toda the todos of that is watering plants and trees. That's a toda of soreya. Number two is hachoresh, plowing. That's making a furrow in the ground and digging a hole, which to sow a plant. That's usually a step before planting. Um, and the total of that is like smoothing bumps in the ground, and filling holes, and plucking weeds. So since plowing is a step before planting, it should have been mentioned first, technically. But the Mishnah lists after planting to teach that where the earth is hard, one must plow it a second time to cover the seeds that were sown. Then one is chayiv for the second plowing as well as the first one. Okay, code says number three, reaping, detaching any plant from its source. So the reaping stalks of wheat or plucking fruit from a tree is considered reaping. Amer, gathering. The you know when you're gathering together the harvested crop. We spoke about this in the Zroyim, melachos. You were gathering up all the bundles, all the grain into bundles. Um, that is gathering. Sticking dates together is into a day cake, into a fig cake, is also a toda of ma'amer. Okay, the fifth one, hadash, threshing. That's when you're detaching the kernels of the grain from their husks. The todas of dashing is milking animals and squeezing the liquid from grapes and olive, the juice really. Number six, zoret, winnowing. After the kernels are detached from their husk, then the mixture is tossed into the air with a pitchfork, and the wind blows away the chaff and all the other junk and leaves the kernels. So there's actually winnowing and um, the, okay. Then the next one, Zion, borer, selecting. After winnowing, the next step in the bread making process is picking out and removing any pebbles or stones that are mixed among the kernels of grain. This malacha is usually done by hand with the utensil. An unwanted matter from that, where you're trying to separate the bad from the good. And number eight is hatochin, grinding. Grinding is when you are pounding when you're when you're grinding up the flour and to make it into smaller, finer, like a finer powder. Chopping vegetables is into very small pieces is a toda of grinding. Number nine, rocket, sifting. So after the kernels of grain have been sifted in and ground into flour, and the flour is put into a sieve and shaken, and then the fine flour falls to the holes, and the coarse flour stays on the top. So technically, winnowing and selecting and sifting, Zoreh and Borer and Morakid are all similar to each other, but the Mishnah counts them as separate avos melachos because they are performed in three separate stages, and therefore they are three different melachos altogether. Number 10, halash, kneading when you're mixing the flour and water and all the ingredients together to make a dough. Ofa and baking, and then you're putting the dough into the oven to bake it. That is that's a malacha. Those are the 13. Those are the 11 malachas um, uh, regarding making bread. Okay, the next category is 13 malachas that are relevant to making clothing. which obviously was involved in making all the curtains and all the different tapestries and begadim for the Mishkan. But the kahuna is involved with this. Number 12, Hagozis as a semer shearing wool, malamno washing it, it's minfatso and disentangling it, vasovo and then dyeing it, vatova and spinning the thread, v'hamesech warping, v'oz shnei bati nirin, and he's setting two heddles. We're going to go through the whole 13 first, then we'll go back and talk about some of them. Weaving two threads, and removing two threads, hakosher, tying a knot is a problem, and untying a knot. Sewing two stitches, korea amanas list for tviros, and tearing in order to sew two stitches. Okay, those are all regarding clothing. So let's go through some of these. Shearing wool, it's when you're cutting the wool or the hair from a live or dead animal, even though the hair was already removed from an animal, that's still considered shearing. Washing, you have to clean the wool. That makes sense. And water. Disentangling, when you shear wool, so these videos like on YouTube, there's so much stuff that's stuck in the wool sometimes that you need to beat them with a stick or comb them in order to get all the junk out. And then dyeing it, you want to dye them into a certain color. And then use properly. Spinning, you're twisting the fibers together to make actual threads. And then warping, you have a loom, and there's the chassis, and there's the Erev, and they interlink. So one's called the warp, one's called the weft. So this is some go ups and down, some go right to left, and the thread is then woven into the woven together. That's the process of weaving. You look up how to weave on YouTube later, and they'll get a better demonstration. Then number 17 was number 18. Do 18. Okay. Anyways, so then you're weaving two threads, where you're putting the two threads in between through the warp and the weft, you're right to left and the left to right. And then moving two threads. You got to take them off of the weaving machine, and then tying a knot. Untying a knot. When you had the fishing nets, they used to trap the zone, which is used in order to make the tejedas. And those nets were made of ropes that were tied together with knots, and therefore you had to untie the ropes in order so they can be added. And tying and untying was all part of the process. Then sewing two stitches, you need to one stitch is not chayiv for Shabbos. You need to have two stitches in order to consider to be a lasting stitch. And then tearing in order to sew two stitches. When a small hole is found in the curtains of the Mishkan, they would make the hole bigger by tearing the fabric next to it, and then they could repair the hole with a patch without making a crease in the cloth. Okay, then the next 7 melachos pertain to the preparation of animal skins. Number 25 is Atzat Tzvi, trapping a deer. 26, that's Shofto and slaughtering it. 27, Amafshito and skinning it. 28, Hamolcho, salting its hide. 29, Amabit as Oro, tanning its hide. 30, Molcho, smoothing the hide. And 31, Cutting the hide. These are all steps of preparing the animals, because trapping a deer, okay, you had to catch it and then trap, um, catching the animal or trapping it in a closed area is a malacha. Um, then slaughtering. When you cannot shecht animals on Shabbos, because these were shechted in the Mishkan in preparation. You know, in the Mishkan, they used animal hides. Skinning it, you have to remove it from the animal in order to make it into leather or to parchment. Salting and tanning. Um, you had to dry out the hide in order to make it useful, and you know, and tanning involved like a lot of salt and then soaking it in various substances. Um, Misarte was when you was sorry. The Gemara actually the takes out one of these and puts the Misarte instead, which is cutting lines into the the parchment or to the hides in order to where the cuts are going to be made. If you look at every Sefer Torah and Tefillin, mezuzahs, there are lines that you have to make. It's called sirtut in order to write the letters on. If you don't have sirtut in your klafim, then the cloth then it's puzzle. Number 30, smoothing. You're scraping the hair off the hide to produce smooth parchment or leather. That's malacha. And then cutting the hide is that is you trim it into a specific size, for like straps or for shoes. That's also a malacha. And then the last batch are the final eight melachos, which is hakosesh just writing two letters, because you wrote letters on each of the boards of the Mishkan. When they dismantled them, they had to make sure that they went back to the same spot, with Aleph and Aleph. So you took the two Aleph sides, and then Beis Beis and Gimel Gimel. That's a malach. And if you're racing in order to write two letters, generally racing is not an issue because you're not high for destruction. But if you're racing in order to write two letters more, then you are chayiv for that. We have bonus number 34, building soser and demolishing. Because when you're demolishing for the sake of building, then that's also a problem. 36, which is extinguishing a fire. And 37, Hamavir, which is lighting a fire, which you spoke about very previously. They would, by the Mishkan, they would light and extinguish the fires under the pots where the dyes were cooked. We also had to light the wicks and then extinguish them. So there was a purpose to putting them out. 38 is a makabeh patish, striking the final blow. Um, where that was at the final hit in order to make the thing perfect. And lastly, hamotzi reshus, when you're transferring objects from one domain to another domain, which we spoke about at the beginning of the Masechta. This is also a malacha. The Mishnah concludes, Hare elu alas melachos, arbaim chasar achas. These are the alas melachos, 40 minus 1. It repeats the count to emphasize that there are only 39 melachos and no more. Yeah, okay. Mishnah Gimel. So after we mentioned the 39 melachos, now we're going to discuss many of them individually, and that's going to be the basis for the rest of the Masechta. So we're going to start. The Chachamim said another rule about Shabbos. Kol hakasha, that's niyamas kamohu, anything that is fit for people to store and is in the quantity that people store. people stock up a certain quantity, that's considered significant. So it's Shabbos chayv lechatas. Therefore, if one carried it outside on Shabbos, one would be chayv chatas for it. So here the Mishnah is teaching us that one is not chayiv for transferring a substance or material unless it meets two conditions. One is that people do not discard it, but they store it for future use. And number two, that the amount that was carried is large enough for people to regard as worth keeping. Therefore, it's an important amount as opposed to a little tiny amount which is not worth too much. The flip side of this rule is that any substance or material that is not fit for people to store or is not in the quantity that people store is not significant. And so if someone carried it outside of Shabbos, I would not be chayiv unless he is a person who does in fact view it as significant and stores it. So like if he has a particular need or like for a certain substance and stored a small quantity of it, even though most people wouldn't bother storing such a small quantity, he would be chayiv for transferring it because it's important to him. Other people would not be liable because in their eyes it's like it's not, it has no significance and no value, so why bother with it? Okay. And the last Mishnah for today, Hamotzi Mishnah Dalit, Hamotzi Tevin Kimlo Pipara. Someone takes out grain straw, which is used to feed cows, is only chayiv if he carries enough to fill a cow's mouth. Utsa Kimlo Pigamo, one who transfers out bean straw, which is used to feed camels, is chayiv only if it carries out enough to fill a camel's mouth. Amir Kimolo P and Amir, which is it's similar to grain straw, but it's also from the stalks of grain plants. But Amir is but Tevin, which is from the lower part of the stalk. So Amir is from the upper part, which is the section that is cut off at the ear when the grain is harvested. It's softer than the lower section, therefore it's given to feed sheep rather than a cow. Okay, so Amir that Amir is has to be enough to fill a sheep's mouth, but it's obviously smaller than a cow. Asav and Kimalel Pigadi, grasses which are used to feed young goats, is enough to fill a young goat's mouth. Ali Shum, Ali Besalim. In the case of garlic leaves and onion leaves, then the halacha depends on the state that they're in. Lachim kigrovris, if they are fresh and fit for people to eat, then the minimum is the measure of a dried fig. Yeveshim pigadi. If they are dry and fit only to feed the goats, then the minimum is the amount needed to fill a young goat's mouth. The aim is and they do not combine with each other to make up a required minimum because their minimum amounts are not the same. Since each substance has a different minimum, they are viewed separately and they do not combine with each other for amounts that would be chayiv on Shabbos. Hamotzi achalim kagrogerus chayiv. One who transfers edible food that is at least the size of a dried fig is chayiv. And if one transfers different kinds of food, they combine with each other to add up to the size of a dried fig because their measurements are equal. Since all the food requires the same minimum measurement, then they combine to form this measure. Chutz miklefeihen v'garineihen v'kotzeihen v'suban umersanan. However, excluded from the measure are their shells, the pits, the stems, and the coarse bran and the fine bran. If they do not combine with the actual food to make up the minimum for edible food, because they're usually not eaten by people. And lastly, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Chutz mekilfei adashim shemis bashlos imahem." That this is true of all shells except for the soft inner shells of lentils that are cooked together with the lentils. Since they're commonly cooked and eaten together, the shells combine with the lentils to complete the minimum measure. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow we will continue with Perek. Have a wonderful day.